Hello and welcome to another episode of Liberty Coin and Precious Metals Radio. Today we are delighted to sit down with Andrew Gavin Marshall, who has probably hundreds of pages of essays on the internet. He's written his own books focusing on depression, global governance, elite ideology, institutions. You can find his work at andrewgavinmarshall.com and thepeoplesbookproject.com. Andrew, thank you for sitting down with us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
One of the things that struck me about your essays was that they, in a very academic way, set out an outline of what the Bilderberg Group or the Trilateral Commission Group or the Council on Foreign Relations groups could actually be. What are the individuals like within those groups, and what are their meetings geared towards? But to start things off, I think we should touch on what is the Bilderberg Group, what is the Trilateral Commission, and what is the Council on Foreign Relations?
Well, essentially, they're both the same questions. I can answer them both at the same time.
Yes.
When I first started researching these organizations, CFR, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, a lot of the critical literature or research that existed sort of presented them as, hubs of conspiracies, secret world governments, these types of things, very secretive and backroom, shady organizations controlling the world. And, that's the majority of the criticism towards these organizations. And then on the other hand, you get all the statements from people who support it and who are with them, who present them just as talking shops, that there's nothing, or that they, for years, decades, there was even claims that Bilderberg Group didn't even exist. And when you actually look a little deeper into the subject, sort of putting both of those extremes on the back burner and just looking at facts, then you can see that it's very much an in-between, kind of down the middle of the road perception of what they are. They are, in a sense, both correct. They bring together elites to talk. They act as think tanks. They have a specific sociological function in society. It's not conspiratorial in the sense of, the legal definition of conspiracy being two or more people colluding to commit a crime. Certainly, war is a crime and all these types of things, and they, organize foreign policy and dictate policy towards wars and other avenues. And so crimes may result, but the actual act of coming together in these organizations is not itself necessarily criminal, although with the Logan Act in the United States, that's debatable. However, it brings together elites from various sectors of society. So you get the academic elite, so the heads of universities, the heads of major foundations, other major think tanks. You bring together business leaders, corporate leaders, of course bankers. Most of these organizations were founded by bankers, and they represent sort of the top of the hierarchy within the organizations, because the organizations themselves are not totally cohesive. There's divisions within them. There's hierarchy within them themselves, as there is within all institutions. They also bring in military, foreign policy leaders and strategists. Of course, very important is to bring in the media. So you have the CEOs of the major media companies and newspaper organizations, etc., and a variety of other major international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and of course the foundation. Mm-hmm. And essentially, what they serve as consensus-building institutions. So they bring together all these various sectors of elite society to formulate policy, strategies, to talk, yes, indeed, to talk and debate, but they're discourses of a very elite variety. So, for example, at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the oldest one of the three that you mentioned, it was founded in 1921. There's a lot of debate and disagreement within the organization and through its various organs of discussion, whether it's formal meetings or through the Foreign Affairs Journal. There's a lot of debate, but the problem is that the discourse is in its own philosophy. So there's no debate on the merits of, say, having an empire. There's no discussion. There's no criticizing the notion of having an empire. You won't read articles saying, we shouldn't be an imperialist country. The debate is simply on the approach to empire, on the rhetoric of empire. So you debate the means, not the ends. And that's essentially how all these institutions function. They bring together people of a particular philosophy, whether or not they come from the left or right. There's a power philosophy at play here which goes above the left and right paradigm. And that's what these institutions serve as socializing organizations for elites.
Interesting, Andrew, and I think that's a very detailed explanation, and I think a very fair one as well. To a degree, I think what results from these meetings in a lot of cases is the creation of culture. Like you said, I think these are in some ways public relations groups for empire building, consensus building. One of the techniques that is used by these individuals, it seems, is soft power. So not necessarily always war to an end, but maybe even just policy implementations by certain governments across the world or corporations in order to present this new world or globalization, if you will, in a positive light. This philosophy of power that you mentioned, I think, is one to touch on. It is a very old philosophy, it seems. Plato even spoke about how the tiny majority should be in control, or the tiny minority, ought to be basically in control of a civilization. So the country is like a ship, and leading this ship, it should be those who are informed, well-read, cultured even, and it's not necessarily a nefarious philosophy. In a lot of ways, it's benign in the mind of an individual, but at the end of the day, it is an elitist philosophy.
Absolutely, and whether or not any time a tyranny is put in place, it's always done in the rhetoric of benevolent means. But certainly there are those who advocate such philosophies and truly do believe in their benevolence. But in reality, when it comes to implementing these philosophies, to institutionalizing them, they always take on their own life, in a sense. And when you institutionalize something which is inherently hierarchical, segregationist, and deeply divisive in terms of, separating a small minority from everyone else, then regardless of the intent of whoever may have come up with the idea or at least propagated it, it takes on its own form, and eventually that generally turns into one or another form of tyranny. Even if you look at the Constitutional Convention in the United States and the discussion in the Federalist Papers and debates that were taking place, James Madison, who was considered the father of the Constitution, even stated at the convention that the purpose of the United States government should be to protect, his quote was, the minority of the opulent against everyone else. Mm-hmm. And of course they were concerned about land and property especially at this time, because property also included persons, because America was built as a slave state. And generally all these founding fathers were slave owners, and the British had encouraged rebellion among the slaves as well as among the indigenous American population, because both of those groups within society feared what would result from sort of the American colonial usurpation of power over the British. And indeed that did result. It became a very difficult and in many ways horrific society for blacks in India and Native Americans, but regardless of the intent of some of the founding fathers or perhaps the benevolence in their statements, we see through history what resulted from that. And if you look at indeed, you were mentioning sort of the philosophy that is around today and the ideas when you mention how, Bilderberg Group and Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations, they essentially create culture, and it's not just about war, and that's a very important point, I think. It's not just about war. War is simply, one means to an end. But there was a very important debate in the intellectual community